If you're a fanatic for the unknown, unfamiliar, and enjoy creepy tales in story format, then this channel's for you. We upload 1 to 2 times weekly, so for more content just like this, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button at the bottom. Now on with our story. Taylor is an accomplished attorney in a very well-known law firm in Washington, D.C. She quickly moved up in the firm and has a very good success rate with her cases. She's been so consumed with work and achieving her career goals, she hasn't taken much time for herself since college. Taylor's now in her mid-30s. She's financially set. She has a very nice home, large nest egg, and is very well known in D.C. She has plenty of people she calls friends, but they're mostly the people she works with. She's also dated quite a bit, but the right guy just hasn't come along and probably never will. He's already came and gone. You see, in college, Taylor found her soulmate, but she had ambitious goals that didn't include a man in her life. She chose her career over John, the man she was head over heels in love with. He was not only tall, dark, and handsome, but he came from a very respected family and money. John's dreams were more about family, having lots of children, and just living an ordinary life. When it comes right down to it, I guess everyone wants what they don't have. Now, Taylor knew she would not be able to fulfill her lifelong dreams if she married John, so she made a decision to follow her dream instead of her heart. This is something she often thought about and had honestly regretted for quite some time. She found herself thinking about John quite a bit and wondering what her life would have been like if she had married him and had a family. When Taylor moved to D.C., John received a big promotion that required him to move to New York. She and John knew it would be tough, but they maintained a long-distance relationship. They often spent weekends and holidays together and talked to each other on the phone every single day. Taylor had it all. She still had a relationship with the man she loved and was also able to pursue her dreams. John and Taylor continued seeing each other for about 2 years. The last time she talked to John was on Valentine's weekend. He sent her a plane ticket with a note that said he would pick her up at the airport at 9. Love you. See you soon. Taylor called John and asked him why he was being so mysterious. He told her it was a surprise and it would be a weekend she would never forget. Now, Taylor was so afraid he was going to propose that weekend, she just didn't show up. Even though she loved John, she just was not ready to settle down and have a family. Taylor never heard from John again. She would call, but he wouldn't answer, and he would never return her calls. Although Taylor was devastated, she figured he was so hurt by her standing him up, he moved on with his life and possibly met someone else who shared his desire for marriage and a family. She just couldn't understand why John just cut off communication with her and wouldn't even talk to her anymore. If he had found someone else, why couldn't he just tell her? Taylor was in the middle of a big case. She was a criminal defense attorney and was handling a very publicized murder case when she received a call from her mother about her father. He had had a stroke and wasn't doing well at all. Her mother couldn't take care of him by herself. Taylor didn't know what to do. Here she was in the middle of one of the biggest cases of her life, but her parents needed her. She was an only child, so she had no one else she could turn to. She turned the case over to one of her colleagues and took some time off work to go back home to help her parents. Taylor knew she had made the right decision. Her mother was up in years and her father was in very bad shape. A few years earlier, Taylor's parents had moved to Florida and downsized quite a bit. They now lived in a very small house with only 1 bedroom. Taylor stayed with her parents a couple of days when she first arrived, but she just couldn't take sleeping on the couch and having no privacy. She found a cottage about 40 minutes from her parents and called the realtor right away. Taylor fell in love with the little cottage and signed a month-to-month lease immediately. This was perfect. The cottage was fully furnished and had plenty of room. She could even set up an office in one of the spare rooms in case she needed to stay longer than she had planned. She would start each day at 6 a.m. Every morning she would go to the gym, shower, get dressed, and arrive at her parents' around 8:30 a.m. A nurse would come in each morning to bathe and dress her father. Taylor prepared all of their meals, helped feed her father, made sure he got his meds, and took him to his physical therapy appointments 3 times a week. She also helped her mom with the housework and just little things around the house that had to be done. Taylor hadn't visited her parents much since she had went to college, so she felt a little guilty and done whatever she could to make up for missed time. By the time she got home each night, she was exhausted, but she always took the time to have her hot tea on the porch in the swing to admire the beautiful landscape. She really looked forward to her silent evenings. It had been a long time since she had time just to herself, to be self-absorbed and get lost in her thoughts. More often than not, her thoughts went straight to John. About a week after moving into the cottage, she started dreaming about John. It was always the same dream. She and John were at the cottage. They were married and had 3 beautiful children. Taylor didn't read too much into the dream. She just thought it was her subconscious showing her what kind of life she could have had. At the end of the dream, she always had a sense of dread. John was trying to show her something, but she always woke up before she seen what it was. Taylor found herself thinking about John all the time now. She would daydream about him during the day and dream about him at night. It was around the 3rd week of her being in the cottage when she heard a knock on the door at around 9 o'clock. Taylor was already in bed reading, and the knock was very unexpected. The cottage was pretty secluded, and no one knew where she was staying. After a few seconds, the knocks came again. She tiptoed to the door and looked out the peephole. She was completely caught off guard and pinched herself to make sure she wasn't dreaming. It was John standing at her door. She just stood there staring at him through the peephole. When he knocked again, it startled her. She was lost in her thoughts, wondering why and how could he be standing at her door. She quickly unlocked the door and swung it open. John smiled. Without hesitation, Taylor threw her arms around his neck and just started kissing him. She was so happy to see John. Taylor didn't care why he was there. She was just glad he was there, and she didn't ask any questions. She and John talked almost all night. She told John about her father and her being there to help her parents. She had only planned to be there for about 2 months, but now it may be a little longer depending on how her father's rehab went. At 4:36 a.m., John abruptly got up and said he had to go. He kissed her on the cheek and left. She was going to walk him out, but he told her no, to stay inside and lock the door behind him. Taylor and John picked up their relationship right where they left off. It was as if they had never been apart. Every night at 9 p.m., John would arrive, and they would spend the entire evening together, but he was always gone when Taylor woke up in the morning. Taylor finally asked John why he left so early, but he just looked at her and said, "This is my life." Taylor didn't really care. She was just happy John was back. One evening when John arrived, Taylor hadn't had dinner, so she suggested they go out to the local diner. John abruptly told her no, he had already eaten. She decided to order pizza and have it delivered. When the delivery guy arrived, she told him to step inside while she got his tip. She turned to say something to John, but he was gone. She called out for him, and he didn't answer. She handed the young man his tip and shut the door. When she turned back around, John was sitting in the chair again. This was weird, but Taylor didn't think too much about it. She ate some of her pizza, she and John talked, watched a little TV before they went to bed. Just like always, the next morning when she woke up, John was gone. She got on with her morning and looked forward to getting through her day so she could get back home to see John that evening. Her father had physical therapy that morning, so they left immediately once she arrived. Taylor was sitting outside waiting on her father when Jennifer, one of her good friends from high school, was heading inside. They immediately recognized each other and started talking. Jennifer was on a tight schedule, so they made lunch plans for the following week. This had been the best 5 weeks of Taylor's life since she and John lost touch. She knew for sure this was the life she wanted, and John was the man she wanted to spend the rest of her life with. She and John were getting closer than ever, and she knew he loved her just as much as she loved him. Finally, she asked John again why he was always gone when she got up, and again he said, "This is my life." She finally asked him if he was married, and if she was the other woman. John smiled and said, "I wanted to be married, but you were always the woman I loved and wanted to spend my life with. There was never anyone else." This was certainly a relief to Taylor. She hadn't even mentioned John to anyone else because she feared what she would have found out. Now she knew it was only her, and she could tell everyone about their relationship. The following day, she met Jennifer for lunch. They talked about typical stuff like high school, college, their careers, and of course their love life. Jennifer said something strange. She told Taylor she was so sorry to hear about John. She told Taylor she tried to call when it happened, but she had misplaced her number. Taylor had lost touch with everyone from her past when she moved to D.C., except her parents and John. Her parents had never met John, and since there were no plans of marriage, she really didn't discuss the men in her life with her parents. Taylor asked Jennifer what she was talking about. Jennifer looked at Taylor with concern and said, "You don't know?" Taylor said, "No what?" Jennifer said, "John died 2 years ago. No one really knew what happened, but they found his body at a cottage on 2 Knots Road." Now, this upset Taylor. She jumped up and ran out of the restaurant. Taylor was crying, upset, and just thought Jennifer was wrong. She had to be wrong. She must have confused her John with someone else. Taylor realized she was renting the cottage on 2 Knots Road. Taylor decided to stop by the landlord's house and find out what happened and who it really was that died. The landlord told Taylor that John Stanton from New York rented the cottage for Valentine's weekend, and he had flew in the Thursday before to prepare the cottage for a romantic weekend. He told Taylor John was planning on proposing that weekend, but tragically his body was found early the next morning. It appeared he had been on a ladder hanging lights around the gazebo, fell off, and broke his neck. Taylor was confused and didn't understand what was going on. She went back to the cottage and waited for John to arrive. Her mind was racing and she was trying to put all the pieces together. At exactly 9 p.m., John walked through the door. She sat there just looking at him, not saying a word. He walked over and sat down beside her on the couch. She reached out to touch him to see if he was real. John said, "Now you know. I'm only real between 9 p.m. and 4:36 a.m. I wanted to be married, but you were always the woman I loved and wanted to spend my life with. There was never anyone else, only you." She sat there crying, just looking at John. They both sat there staring at each other until 4:36 a.m., when John slowly faded away. The time made sense now. He always arrived at 9 p.m., and that was the time he was supposed to pick her up at the airport. Later, Taylor found out that the time of death was determined to be around 4:30 a.m. Taylor knew John passed at exactly 4:36 a.m. Taylor wasn't afraid. She just wanted to be with John. The next night, John returned at 9 p.m. Taylor now knew the only way she could be with John is if she was willing to give up her career and her life in D.C. for the man she loved. Even though she only had a window of time to spend with John each night, she cherished those moments. Taylor bought the cottage, and this is where she lived with John for the remainder of her days. It's often said John and Taylor can be seen sitting in the swing on the porch, sipping their tea between 9 p.m. and 4:36 a.m. We hope you liked today's story, and don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button at the bottom, or you may receive a visit at around 9 p.m.